Founders love how AI speeds up product development, but they rarely stop to ask themselves, what is the legal effect of this artificial intelligence system that I'm integrating into my product? Or what kind of legal exposure am I creating anytime my team uses an AI tool? These are questions that they don't ask, and if left unanswered, especially for a startup, it can cause all kinds of legal risks and situations that you do not want. Hey guys, I'm Nneoma Grace, a corporate and tech lawyer passionate about helping founders and startups just like yourself start, grow, and scale their startups. And that includes helping you to understand the legal exposures that you open yourself up to when you or your team uses artificial intelligence in their product build. Now, in 2025, everybody was embedding artificial intelligence into their product, whether it's to analyze user data, to speed up product development, to automate support, to reduce costs, and for a whole host of other benefits. Rightly so, because AI is very, very beneficial to productivity and efficiency. But we don't stop to think about the fact that every single time we embed an artificial intelligence tool into our product, it has legal exposures, it has legal risks that come with it. And so in this video, I'm going to break down the key legal risks that you as a founder, you as a startup, need to look out for each and every time you embed or integrate an artificially intelligence tool into your product. Now, these risks are going to be broken down in several categories. And the first category is the data and the privacy risk. Now, ever since 2020, really, everybody has been talking about data, the protection of data, data privacy, privacy to life and information, and all these things that have to do with the protection of their personal information. Because truthfully, data is the new gold. Data is one of the most valuable assets that anyone has. And as a startup, when you embed AI tools or AI systems into your product, you need to understand that they stop data differently, they process data differently, and they use data differently. So there are several risks, even under data and privacy alone, that you can run into when you use AI tools in your product build. One of those data and privacy risks is sharing sensitive information or personally identifiable information with AI systems. When you accidentally feed sensitive or personally identifiable information or data to an AI tool or an AI system, you need to understand that they don't just use the data or give you the specific output based on that data and then discard it. No, more often than not, that data is stored, that data is logged, it is cached in some kind of server, or it is, for the better part of it, kept for use in either retraining itself, or it is added to the host of training data that the AI system learns from to further improve itself and give you even better outputs. So that data that you're putting in, it doesn't just get discarded, it is retained. And so as a startup, especially if you're in a sensitive industry like health tech or fintech or insurance technology or anything of the sort that deals with very, very sensitive data, you need to be careful of the kind of data you feed AI tools, because this data, when they are retained, now you're getting liable for data privacy violations, you're getting fines and penalties by the regulating bodies and all that, and nobody wants that kind of use on their hands, because in so doing you even go as far as breaching the existing data laws. And again, if you have users that are from different places, let's say you have users in Nigeria, you have users in the UK, you have users in the US, these countries or these places, these jurisdictions, they have their own independent or specific data laws. And if you breach their data laws, then you're going to have cross-border violations, and it's difficult enough dealing with a violation within the country if you're dealing with users in one country. Right now, think about it when you're now dealing with users in multiple countries and you have violations across that many laws. Nobody wants to have to deal with that kind of or that level of disruption to their business operations. So please, when you're using AI tools, especially when it comes to data and privacy, take care with the kind of data you feed the AI tools. Another serious risk of using artificial intelligence or embedding artificial intelligence systems in your product build is intellectual property risks. Now, with intellectual property, the question on everyone's mind is who owns what? Who owns the creation of an artificial intelligence system? And should there be a damage or should there be fault somewhere? Who is liable for those faults or who is liable for those damages? And we all know that the answer to these questions is that AI cannot be the owner of an intellectual property. All intellectual properties must be traceable to a human author or a human creator. And so if you are imputing things or imputing prompts into this artificially intelligent system, you will be unable to own it, and so will your users. More so, it can even lead to training data contamination, because now you have to understand that these AI systems, they are trained on millions and millions and millions of works. Some of those works are copyrighted, and so when you use the artificial intelligence system, or when you embed it into your product, and then there's a prompt and there's an output, you have to understand that more often than not, using these outputs in your product can lead to contamination or can lead to copyright infringement of first of all, of the author's works, the many authors. You can be vicariously liable. You never really know. And so to avoid that legal gray area, it's best to not even attempt, or if you are attempting to use it, make sure that your agreement with the AI vendor is such that you know who exactly owns what and who is liable should there be a damage or should there be any talk of infringement. Then there's also the danger that you can be sued for replication, which again is also intellectual property infringement, because no matter how generic or simplistic your inputs to that artificial intelligence system might be, again, they are trained on millions and millions of works and resources and people's written articles, blogs, songs, whatever the case is. It is trained on millions of resources, and it can lead to copyright infringement, or any other kind of contamination or replication of that work that can then be said, oh, okay, this is a derivative of XYZ works. And again, that is a legal gray area that you do not want to step your foot into, because you just might be used as a precedent, and not the good kind, or at least not the kind that will favor you. Then there's also the risk of AI to software or to source code. Let's take, for instance, now you have generated this or at least this AI system has generated this code for you that you then want to utilize in your product build. What if that code bears resemblance to an open source code that has certain restrictive licenses, and then you go and you implement it in your system or in your product build as well, not knowing that, again, you not only have you contaminated your own product, you have made your product commercially unusable, because should it be found out that your code or your product bears resemblance with something that is legally protected, whether it's an open source that has a restrictive license or if it's someone else's proprietary license or anything of the sort, you can find yourself again in a legal gray area that you do not want to be caught in the middle of. It might also be a challenge for you to maintain and audit the integrity of your product, because now you can't really tell the difference between a human generated code or the AI generated code in your product. And so now you're wondering, okay, if I want to audit this thing, if I want to, in my software bill of materials, who owns what, or what code did I use? Does it have any license attached to it that I need to be aware of? It becomes difficult for you to do. Why? Because your code, your source code, has been a mishmash of human generated and AI generated, and the AI generated might either be correct or look so close or resemble so close the human generated code that it's very, very difficult to tell them apart. And so now you're unsure of who owns what, you're unsure of what kind of licenses apply, and you're unsure of how exactly your product will fare in the long run. These intellectual property risks matter to your product and its longevity, because number one, when you use AI systems in your product build without checking it properly to understand that, okay, this one is good and free to use, it can lead you to things like loss of commercial exclusivity. Because now, I'm sure you're not the only one that prompted that artificial intelligence machine to produce that output. And I'm sure you're not the only one that is building the innovative idea that you think that you're building. You're probably not the only one. And so you have lost the exclusive edge that you might have otherwise gotten in the market, because now your code or your product is no longer as unique as you thought it is. There's also the risk of litigation or liability, where you have inadvertently used someone's copyrighted work in your product build and they find out. You will be liable for that, for copyright infringement, for intellectual property infringement, and you will face multiple legal exposures. There's also the risk of investors or acquisition, where if you want to get an investor, or you want your company or your product to be acquired, or even if you want to license it out to someone else, there is a risk that the integrity of your product, of your code, of your software has been compromised. So it's not as proprietary as you originally thought it was. When your code or your software or your product is a mishmash of human generated code and AI generated code, and something happens, for instance, in the future, and you're trying to untangle them, you find that you spend even more time, even more energy, even more money, and various other resources in dividing or cleaning up the mess that has been created. And so that causes a lot of operational lag, not just on the back end, but also with your users as well. And we all know that if a product stalls and stalls and stalls and stalls for a really, really long time, users will find an alternative. And you do not want to be left for an alternative, especially if your product does or fulfills really, really good problems, or solves really, really good problems for people. If they go ahead and find an alternative and they find that, okay, that alternative is cleaner, is easier to use, and it doesn't have as many operational lags as your product does, they would migrate. And that is a loss of finances for you, a loss of the time that you spent and the energy you've expended in building this thing. So it's just easier, intellectual property wise, it's just easier to manage and monitor the usage of artificial intelligence systems and their outputs in your product build. Now, other than data and privacy risks and intellectual property risks, what other risks are there to using AI in your product build? We also have security risks. When you use an artificial intelligence system or their output to help you build up your product, it has tons and tons of benefit, but it also poses various security risks, because now you're not sure exactly how the AI companies are actually storing and using your data, especially when you then go ahead and feed it user data or customer data. You don't know exactly how that data is being stored or logged or cached, and so that can cause vulnerabilities, not just for you as a company, but vulnerabilities for your users as well. It leaves you wide open to regulatory fines, violations, penalties, and all of those things that you naturally as a startup and as a company do not want. There is also a lack of transparency and a lack of control, because now you don't know exactly what processes your data goes through when it's in that AI system, or when the AI system is embedded in your product. You have zero control over how it is managed, how it is processed, how it is deleted, how it is stored, and generally the movement of that data. You have zero control over it. And so if a regulator comes and starts to ask questions, or if a user starts to ask questions, you cannot answer them, because you are unsure of the processes and you have no control over those processes. You also find that there's a higher chance that your product will be compromised, because if you have many AI tools or AI systems plugged into your software or plugged into your code, it's very, very easy for it to be hacked by, it's very easy for it to be hacked, or for the integrity of that product or of that system, code, whatever it is, to be compromised. Whether it's by a malware, or they're filtering data from it, or there's some other kind of vulnerabilities that can attack your your system, it's very, very easy for it to be compromised. And you know that once your product or your system is compromised, it has a chain reaction, because not only are you as a company, your operations as a company, not only is it affected, your customers, your users are also affected. Their data is also affected, which then brings in regulators to start looking at you and looking at your company and looking at what you're doing. And so it causes this chain reaction that as a startup you really, really, really don't want, because you find that by the time you're putting out this fire, this other one springs up, and then that other one springs up, and it turns into a whole mess. There's also contract and vendor risks. Yes, the use of AI helps us with our productivity, it helps us be more efficient, and a whole host of other benefits. But when you're entering into an agreement with an AI vendor, even when you're using their products without, let's say for instance now you're using ChatGPT, now you don't have to physically walk up to OpenAI and say, oh, I want to sign this contract with you. No, you accept their terms and conditions, you accept the licensing agreements that they have, you accept their privacy policies and all these other hosts of documents that they have. You click accept. 9 times out of 10 you don't read it, you just click accept. You have accepted their terms and conditions, and so you don't even know what is contained in those agreements or what it is that you have agreed to be bound by. Now it becomes even worse when you use the output that they feed you to build your product or to build core features of your product, because now there is a limit to your ownership rights of that property, unknown to you, but there is a limit to your ownership rights in that property, or I keep saying property, in that software, in that solution, in that product that you're building. There's also a unilateral modification, because the AI companies, the AI vendors, they can unilaterally amend, modify, even remove or terminate their terms and conditions, their licensing agreements, and you will be notified, obviously. But again, how many of us actually take the time, or how many of you founders actually take the time to read those agreements and to see what exactly was modified and how those modifications affect you, especially because you've used their outputs or the outputs of their AI machines or their AI systems to build up or further improve your product. Now there's also liability shifting, because again, most times nobody wants to be blamed for anything, nobody wants to be liable for anything. So 9 times out of 10, these AI vendors, they will move all liability to the user. Now if you as a user takes the output of these AI machines to build up your product, and another person is affected by your product, detrimentally affected by using your product, and they come to blame you and you go to blame the AI company, the AI company will be like, no, we had so and so and so in our terms and conditions, in our licensing agreements that you have agreed to, and so we bear no liability. The liability falls on you. What do you do then? Especially if it's not just one of your users that is affected, it's a whole wide range of people. What do you do then? So you have to be very, very careful of not only of the AI tools that you use in your product build, but of the terms and the conditions, the contracts that you agree to. It either, whether it's a click wrap, you just click them and it agrees to every other one, or whatever it is, you have to be very careful of the things that you agree to and the things that you use, especially in the build of your product for its core features, even for other features, but especially for core features. And more especially if you're in a sensitive industry like the health industry or the finance industry or anything of the sort. Now, if these risks, both the intellectual property risk, the data privacy risk, the security risk, the contract and vendor risks are not enough for you, and you're asking, well, Nneoma, what else could probably go wrong? Okay, now you have the regulatory risks. Because again, as you're building your startup, you're not building in a vacuum. There were others that came before you, and those people that came before you were regulated by the government, by a regulator mandated by the government and the laws to regulate you. And so they are also looking at what you're doing, because they are a stakeholder in your company. So they're also looking at what you're doing. And so if you impute AI tools or AI systems, if you embed them in your product build, you can run afoul of several sector-specific regulations. For example, data protection and privacy. you can run afoul of those laws. You can run afoul of several other sector-specific rules, especially, again, if you're in sensitive or highly regulated sectors like, say, the finance, the health, insurance, and all of that. And once you run afoul of these laws, obviously, they are going to inflict or they're going to give you penalties for either your non-compliance or your violation of the laws. There's also explainability and accountability. You have to be able to explain what is in your product. If you're building something or if you've built something and you cannot explain what is in it, you cannot be held accountable for what is in it, then do you really own that product? More so with your product, if you've embedded these AI tools in your product, you need to be able to explain the decisions reached by your product. You need to be able to explain the decisions reached by your product if AI tools and systems were embedded in it. So for instance, now when it comes to credit scoring or insurance or anything in a sensitive industry like that, and you've embedded AI tools in your product and it's the AI that for the most part makes the decision, you need to be able to explain to regulators and to your customers or consumers or users why that decision was reached or how that decision was arrived at. And if you cannot do that, then that poses serious risks for you as a company and as a founder. There's also the regulatory risk of fairness and algorithmic bias. Now, we already know that these AI systems were trained on various data sets, and that data or those data sets might have been applicable to one sect or one group of people and detrimental to the other people. If you don't know this, because how is it possible for you to know every single piece of data that an AI was trained on? So if you don't know this, which chances are you might not know it, and you impute or you embed these AI tools and systems and prompts into your product build, the same algorithmic biases that they had will carry over into your product. And now you find that your product is being discriminatory to a certain group of people or to a certain feature as opposed to the other. And if you cannot explain that, going back to explainability and accountability, if you cannot explain that and be held accountable for it, because know and understand that the AI companies will not bear responsibility for it, more often than not, they've written away their liability onto the users of their systems. So you'll be liable for that. And when you're liable for that, that would not only cost you finances, it would also cost you time to clean up that mess. It would also endanger your reputation, and those can have its ripple effects. Then there's also cross-border regulations and the possibility of breaching one of those regulations. Again, if you're using an AI company, let's say for instance now your AI vendor is ChatGPT. ChatGPT is hosted in the United States, and say for instance you're in Nigeria with users in the UK. Can you see the chain? So what if a UK citizen has an issue now? Obviously, they will report to the general governing body in the UK. And then that governing body will be like, oh, okay, wait, this is a Nigerian company. And then, the Nigerian company. And then, oh, wait, we're using AI systems in the US. Do you see the chain? Do you see how confusing it can get? So these, and it's almost difficult, not impossible, but it's difficult to keep track of all of the tiny regulations in all of these many jurisdictions. So when you're imputing AI tools or when you're embedding AI systems and prompts and outputs into your product build, you have to be really, really careful so that you don't get yourself in trouble with either regulatory risks or data privacy risks or security risks or intellectual property risks. Now, how can you as a startup mitigate these risks? Let's say for instance now you've made a mistake and you've entered into or you've had one of these risks and they've actually actualized and happened to you. How can you either mitigate them or better yet avoid them entirely? The first is have clear AI use policies in your organization. Again, artificial intelligence, intellectual property, data, these are hot topics, right? It's on the mouth of everyone. So as a company, it is only expedient that you have an AI use policy to guide, manage, and regulate the use of artificial intelligence in your company, especially in your product build, if you're using it for core products or for regular features of your product. You also need to conduct rigorous reviews and audits of your product and of your systems, your operational systems as a company, so that you can understand where exactly is AI being used, how exactly am I managing that use of AI, or am I able to manage it? If I'm unable to manage it, what can I do to bring it down to a manageable size or impact, or something that you can easily handle. Then you have to implement code governance, aka your source code, your software code governance, and intellectual property governance practices. What does that mean? Know who does what, so that you can very easily answer the question who owns what and who is liable for what. When you implement these code governance policies, or when you implement IP management policies, now you can have a list. Again, going back to the software bill of materials, you can have a list of which software or which source code did you use. Is it open source? If it's open source, what kind of licenses does it have? And are those licenses restrictive? What do those licenses give me the ability to do or not do? You need to understand these things. The more you understand them, the better the running of your company and of your product is. You also need to adopt robust security controls and measures in your company, just so that if any of these security risks happen, whether it's data filtration or there's a malware somewhere or there are other vulnerabilities that you need to take care of, you will be able to respond to that incident quickly and manage the chaos before it gets out of hand. And then you also need to foster a positive culture in your organization of risk management, proactive risk management, so that your staff, the other members of your team as a company, are actively scanning for where risks might emerge from, and they are taking care of it, putting out those fires before they become infernos that you cannot manage easily. Last but not the least, as a founder, especially as a founder, you need to continuously learn, continuously update your intellect bank, your memory bank, your level of intelligence when it comes to, number one, not only even your product, but artificial intelligence and the impact of it in your system, so that should any risk or anything else, should it come up in your organization, you are easily able to handle it, or at least you know where to look at or what resources to engage to help you easily manage whatever risk occurs or has occurred. But by and large, the good news is that these risks are manageable, right? These risks are manageable. So again, you have to, as a founder, you have to update yourself, so that if you as a founder cannot manage it, you know what resources to draw on or to pull from to be able to manage these risks, because they are largely manageable. It will take time, effort, skill, knowledge, all of that, but they are manageable. And yes, this is not to scare you away from using artificial intelligence systems or outputs in your product build. No, this is just to inform you that should you use them wisely, right? Don't have a product that is a mishmash of human generated code and AI generated code. It complicates your work, right? It complicates your product, and it's harder to untangle. So if you're using AI, use it with wisdom, because indeed AI is here to make our productivity and our efficiency as humans better. So use it with wisdom. And that, guys, concludes today's video on the legal risks of using AI in your product build. If you found this video helpful, which hopefully you did, please don't forget to hit the like button down below so that this video can be shared to many more amazing people such as yourself. I will see you in the next one. Bye.